That is Ohio State making a move at D.C. It was announced yesterday, late in the day, that they had hired Oklahoma State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles to run his defense. Knowles has done an amazing job with the Cowboys, moving them from 97th to 5th nationally in scoring D in his time there. He was with David Cutcliffe at Duke prior to that. He is an Ivy Leaguer, played at Cornell, was the head coach there as well. He's going to start after he coaches the Cowboys D in their bowl game. So, Anthony, thoughts on this hire?
I mean, statistically, I think it certainly works when you look at what Oklahoma State's defense became under him. It's a bit of an attacking style, a bit of an aggressive style that, you know, it still has versatility to it. Some 4-2-5 alignment, some 4-3, even some 3-3-5. I was looking back at the film from the Big 12 championship game and what they were doing against Baylor. It's a very multiple front as far as what they do, especially with their front seven and the way that they attack the backfield with sacks and tackles for loss. I think the big play is certainly a big part of what has always been, you know, sort of part of the Jim Knowles DNA in previous stops he's been at. And when you can play defense in the Big 12, man, in that conference for what defense has been there over the years, you got to be an impressive defensive mind.
No doubt. And I think what is kind of a parallel situation to a certain extent is you think of Mike Gundy as an offensive coach, right? And needed to improve his defense. Ryan Day is the same way. I look at the one stat that really jumped out at me this year with Ohio State was 13th in the Big Ten in third down defense. Oklahoma State was second in the nation this year. They were first in the nation last year. So the aggression's great, but you got to be able to get off the field. And his defenses can get off the field.
Yeah, and that's where the adjustments end up, you know, coming into play. Even in the red zone. You think of that Big 12 championship game in the red zone, what they were able to do against Baylor in limiting them at certain opportunities they had. And conversely, obviously, Baylor's defense was able to do the same to their offense at some critical moments. But, you know, statistically, Ohio State has a lot of ground to cover. And this isn't just about this season, in my impression, with Ohio State. This is about a handful of years here where really, you know, 2019 is kind of the outlier where the Buckeyes truly played great defense that year. And aside from that, we've seen whether it was Greg Schiano, whether it was Kerry Combs, you know, kind of that, you know, Jeff Hafley year was really the only one that we saw Ohio State look defensively like we're accustomed to them looking. You reference Oklahoma State. I think a lesson to be learned from that, and who knows what the discussions were like between Jim Knowles and Ryan Day as you know, this hire ended up getting made, but we saw Oklahoma State take a more rush-centered approach on offense. And I've talked to you about that a few times here, where how the run game and a little more ball control can complement what your defense does when they take the field. And it can be difficult.
And keep them off the field a little bit too, right? Control the ball. And it's interesting because we do think of Ryan Day, obviously, as more of a passing-oriented coach, despite having some really good running backs. But that is interesting because that is one way that you can help your defense, no question, is to control the ball a little bit longer. I like the fact, too, that kind of given the struggles they've had, they went outside the family. They went to someone who isn't directly connected with the program. I think if you've had really good defenses and you want to have that continuity of people who kind of know what you're doing, great. But they haven't had great defenses, to your point, and so why not? Hey, let's get some fresh ideas in here and let's see.
And Jim Knowles has been a recruiting coordinator at multiple stops that he's been at prior to this, and so it's not necessarily a huge part of his resume where he's thought of as like this ace recruiter that you hear all the recruiting websites sort of touting that acumen, but he obviously recognizes the importance of it, and he has at least been tasked with heading that up for multiple programs before this point. So you wonder if a Kerry Combs maybe stays on as defensive backs coach or something like that. Some of those decisions are still yet to be announced, but I think there could be a combination of that where you bring in someone new who's done it at a high level for a long time to lead your defense while perhaps still keeping some familiar faces around.
Someone is going to have to leave the staff just in terms of sheer numbers, whether it's voluntarily or whether someone is asked to leave. We will see. But again, not the situation. And that was announced yesterday. As we said, Nebraska made a move that they announced today. They have a new offensive coordinator. Remember, they have a bunch of vacancies on that offensive staff. And they filled the highest profile one today with a high profile guy, Mark Whipple, the Huskers' new OC, one day after he resigned from the same position at Pitt. He's led the Panthers offense for the last 3 years. They were fabulous this season. Third in the nation in scoring, 43 points per game. Kenny Pickett, the quarterback, is a Heisman finalist. Thoughts on this move?
I mean, obviously with the moves that Scott Frost made on the offensive side of the ball, and new blood was going to come in, it's a bit of a, I suppose, a tenuous sort of circumstance for a new coach, a new coordinator to step into, because, it's good to see the administration, Trev Alberts, making sort of a renewed commitment to Scott Frost, while at a diminished salary reportedly and some of those things. But to get someone of this acumen, someone of this success, who's got a Heisman finalist quarterback coming off this season, I think it's a great position for Nebraska to find themselves in, while you still do have continuity, because Scott Frost is the one who still has his hands on directing the offense and calling many, if not all, of the plays, depending on what game and what the game plan is going into it. So we know still what Nebraska's offense will largely look like, while you bring in this experience with Whipple in a variety of different schemes that he's been a part of in the past to aid what you're doing. I'm
with you. I think the balance of who kind of is in charge and how much they collaborate is really interesting, because unlike on the other hire we were talking about, I mean, this is Scott Frost's area of expertise, right? I mean, he's an offensive coordinator coming in from Oregon, and so he obviously has strong thoughts. And look, their offense has been statistically pretty good, other than kind of when it really mattered. I mean, they kind of tended to shoot themselves in the foot for whatever reason. But again, we talked about in regular season, they were one of the top offenses statistically in a lot of measures in the Big Ten, including total offense. So it's interesting there. It's also interesting, another Ivy Leaguer. So you got two Ivy League grads coming in, because he is a Cornell, a Brown grad, I should say. Whipple is. Knowles, a Cornell grad, but Whipple's been a head coach at his alma mater
for quite a long
Brown,
time.
and was a head coach at UMass too, so he has a head coaching experience as well. So I think both of these guys are really interesting hires in that, again, they've been head coaches, maybe not at the same level. They have diverse and interesting backgrounds. They're both really good hires. And again, just purely statistically, really successful.
And both head coaches still fairly young and, have been at it as head coaches for a few seasons at this point. But to show the confidence to bring in someone older, someone more experienced, to enhance the way that you're just operating as a staff in total. I think specifically for Nebraska as well, they announced their offensive line hire also, and bringing in Donovan Raiola. He's a guy who's been right here in this city of Chicago that we're sitting in right now as an assistant O-line coach for the Bears for a few years now. And the Bears have gone through multiple head offensive line coaches, but Donovan Raiola was kept on between multiple guys and leading the way for the Bears offensive line. And he's well regarded. When you talk to folks at Hallis Hall about Donovan Raiola, he has been a guy who they feel teaches the position at a high level. And you're certainly going to need that to continue to enhance the way you operate with the tailback run game, if you can come downhill at some folks with more frequency, because Nebraska, using the QB run game, has been exceptional. They've been inconsistent with that tailback run game. Yeah, there really hasn't been a clear-cut answer there in a few years. So that is the story with the assistant coach hires today. There's some other assistant coach news, though, as well. The Broyles Award, which is awarded to the top assistant coach in college football, was announced last night, and Josh Gattis from Michigan got it. Again, named the nation's top assistant coach. He did a fabulous job with the Michigan offense. You think on so many different levels, a unit that finished in the top 25, as you can see nationally in every category you see here. The run game particularly impressive, 9th in the nation. Remember, they were 95th in that category last year. Frankly, both of their coordinators did an amazing job. You can make a strong case, I think, for Mike McDonald as well, although he was not a finalist. But thoughts on Gattis winning it? It's a great story, if nothing else, because of the fact that we've seen season over season Michigan's offense. When Jim Harbaugh first brought Josh Gattis in, and the immediate question I and others were asking was like, well, Jim Harbaugh, are you really going to give up control of this offense? And that first season he said, yes, I am. This is going to be Josh's show. They needed to modernize the offense, and that began to happen sporadically. I think Josh Gattis has gotten far more comfortable just in how to scheme and game plan and sequence plays and find those moments where you sort of can take that shot play. While it does have that Harbaugh influence that's there, we're seeing the melding of some of that old school Jim Harbaugh, Bo Schembechler kind of brand of Michigan offense with the new version of things, with still using jet motion, using sweeps, using a variety of screen game, using some trick plays in there like we saw with the tailback pass there. So I think overall, the way that Michigan's operated offensively this season and the way it grew throughout the year. I think that's a big showcase for what a coach can become, because Josh Gattis hadn't called plays before we saw him get to Ann Arbor in this stretch here, and it really proves what can happen when there is consistency and continuity within a staff.
Yeah, I think the thing that really stood out to me about the job that Josh Gattis did, first of all, to your point, he was kind of allowed to ease into it. I mean, it was up and down. They made a point of wanting to be more explosive. And early on, it didn't really seem like that was happening. And now you look, this year, they have more plays of 50 yards or longer than any team in the country. But also, as you said, this is not some sort of crazy wide open offense. I mean, 39 rushing touchdowns. Aside from service academies, that's the most of any team in the country, right? So it's not as if they have kind of abandoned the core principles of this is who we are as Michigan. I think it's it's a fun offense to watch because it melds so much, because they are true to who they are, who Jim Harbaugh has been, and I think to a certain extent who Michigan has been traditionally. But then I think to your point also, they also said, hey, we've got to modernize this a bit too. And so it is. It's kind of this amalgam of offenses that really works, that's unpredictable, that keeps people off balance. We saw early in the year it was a running offense. We saw at times in the year it was a passing offense. And now I think they found a really good balance where, frankly, I don't know that the opponents know what's coming. They're going to need that against Georgia.
I was talking about it a month into the season where it felt like there was more meat on the bone for that passing attack, and they pretty quickly got to it out of that second half from that Rutgers game where they began to throw the ball more effectively, more efficiently, certainly taking advantage of the deep play opportunities. And so that growth and that recognition schematically of what your quarterback can become, what Cade McNamara ended up being. And they got an all Big Ten quarterback now in Cade McNamara. That's great for them and what they can continue to be as a program. And when Josh Gattis first took the gig, I mean, he came in and he had some lemons that he had to try to make some lemonade out of. But I mean, I think that overall, his growth as a play caller, their growth schematically with that cohesion we were talking about a moment ago, puts Michigan in the position they're in right now in the college football playoff.
Let's get into a few player awards. We were talking about a coaching award there. We don't need that. Talking about a player award there with coaching award with Josh Gattis, but Aidan Hutchinson on the other side of the ball, of course, is a finalist for the Ted Hendricks Award, as is a pretty good player from the Purdue Boilermakers, George Karlaftis, who let us know. We talked about this earlier in the week, but he tweeted out this week that he is not coming back to Purdue. It's a little unclear with him and with David Bell as to whether or not they're going to play in the bowl game. But this is the tweet from Karlaftis, again, making it clear that he is moving on, thanking his family and his friends and his coaches and his teammates. If you can't read all the fine print there, I would say that's probably tough to read. But what stands out as you evaluate him specifically as an NFL prospect?
Well, he came out of high school fairly polished, just with the overall skills that he brought to the table, kind of the toolbox as a pass rusher. And the athleticism wasn't necessarily quite in line with a lot of the other 5 stars that were there. But we've seen that. The work he puts in the weight room, on the football field, the fundamentals of the position as a run defender have enhanced every season he's been in West Lafayette, and all that attention he gets paid by the opponents week in and week out. It enhanced the way that entire defensive front, the whole front 7 that they were able to operate. So George Karlaftis, and moving on, I think it makes all the sense in the world. He's been there for 3 seasons. He has left his imprint on that program. We'll see what decision David Bell ends up making, but I'm one of the Hendricks Award voters, and Aidan Hutchinson is one of those finalists as well. There are a lot of quality defensive ends around this country who are up for that award this year. And George Karlaftis, because the statistics aren't there, a lot of folks may have been a little bit surprised by some of the regard that many of us paid George Karlaftis. But when you watch the film, even opening up against Oregon State, where he had like 2 tackles or something like that, but you just saw he was unblockable throughout most games.
Yeah, he really impacts the game. He's first in the FBS in knockdowns. So again, some of these stats that don't necessarily get as the same amount of publicity. People talk about sacks and tackles for loss, but there are lots of other ways to impact the game, and that's one of them. Real quick, I mentioned Hutchinson. You said on that Ted Hendricks award list as well. Hutchinson a finalist for the Heisman. C.J. Stroud a finalist. Kenneth Walker is not. Your thoughts on that?
I was surprised that Kenneth Walker wasn't a finalist for the Heisman. I mean, we'll see, where the overall vote totals end up. But I mean, when it comes down to it, just as far as an individual force throughout the season that was as impactful as any in college football, the most dramatic turnaround we saw of any Power 5 program this season was the Michigan State Spartans, beyond so many expectations this year. And when you think of Spartan football this year, certainly you think of Mel Tucker, but right in line with that, you think of what Kenneth Walker III meant on their very first snap of the season, what he meant, and was able to maintain that combustible ability, one of the most electrifying players in the country, to not be a Heisman finalist. I found it surprising.
It's shaping up to be quite a night on the Big Ten Network, a fabulous hoops doubleheader. I'll be at Madison with Stephen Bardo as number 22 Wisconsin hosts Indiana. Then it's 19th-ranked Michigan State heading to the Barn to take on the unbeaten Gophers. All the fun starts with the Auto Owners Insurance Tip-Off Show, 6:30 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. And this segues nicely into our big interview, joined by my friend and colleague, Mike DeCourcy, also of the Sporting News. Mike, thanks for taking the time out to join us. Let's start with the Badgers and the Hoosiers. Wisconsin has emerged to me as one of the really pleasant surprises in the league. You think about this team, they were so veteran last year, and we kept talking about the fact their starting lineup was older on average than the Chicago Bulls. They lost 67% of their scoring from a year ago, and yet they may actually be better. I mean, they certainly appear to be better. I think they appear to be a more cohesive team so far this year. Johnny Davis has emerged as a star here in the Big Ten. What has stood out as you've watched Wisconsin to this point?
Well, I think it starts with Johnny Davis. Do we have to go back to Alondo Tucker to go that far to see an individual player who had as much influence on a team as he has? I mean, they've had great players over that period, 15 years or so since Alondo played there. They had terrific talent and guys who were difference makers, but I'm not sure that they've had anybody who was as consequential an individual as Johnny has been. It missed one game, they lost. Every game he's played in, they've won. He makes a difference at both ends of the floor. He can create offensive opportunities for himself. He makes deep shots. He's a complete player. In a season when there are so many, I mean, think about it, so many candidates for first team all Big Ten, very early, obviously, but we could sit here for almost the entire segment and list guys who would be at home on a first team all Big Ten selections, and he is very much among those.
Well, Trace Jackson-Davis is on that list as well, and again, they'll go head-to-head tonight here for the Hoosiers. Now, Indiana hasn't really played a great schedule to this point. I was looking it up in terms of the Ken Palm strength of schedule. The only teams in the Big Ten that have played easier schedules to this point are Northwestern and Iowa. So you don't want to read too much into Indiana's record, but still, they're 7-1 with a new coach. They went on the road and lost that crazy game to Syracuse. Other than that, they've won every game. This will be their second road game. What have you seen from the Hoosiers as Mike Woodson kind of tries to retool here?
Yeah, as I've looked at Mike Woodson since he was hired, I've talked about this a lot, that I don't think that he has made a misstep to this point in his college coaching career. The way he was able to keep the team, the players together, guys like Trace Jackson-Davis and Race Thompson and Robert Finney, and keep them in the program. The transfers he was able to bring in. So many important things that he's done. And although the schedule has not been strong, I believe that's exactly what they needed. A year ago, their schedule was so difficult and they got so beaten down that by the time they got into Big Ten play, they didn't really know how to win a basketball game. They knew how to play, but they didn't know how to win. So now that's covered. They know how to finish off a game. And of course, at Syracuse, they made some mental errors, especially in the overtime when Christian Lander got over the half-court line, accepting the ball with 10 seconds, got over the half-court line and froze. They know now you can't do that. You can't win like that. So they know how to win. They know how to lose. They know what mistakes lead to that. So I think that they now are at the point where they need to take that step up in class. And Wisconsin is certainly fits that category. The Wisconsin road game fits the category of the daunting challenge that very few Hoosiers teams have been able to conquer, and certainly none for quite a while. But I think that that's good for IU, because if they can get over this, if they can go into the Kohl Center and win the game that very few of their predecessors have been able to win, I think that would be an immense step forward for this group.
Yeah, just for those who may have forgotten this amazing stat, Indiana has lost 18 straight at the Kohl Center. They won there not long after it opened in 1998, have not won since. There's not a single player on Indiana's roster who was alive the last time the Hoosiers won a game at the Kohl Center. It's remarkable. I want to turn the page through the second game tonight. I want to focus on Minnesota because I think they have been one of the big surprises here so far, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally. Ben Johnson has his team defending at a remarkable level. Again, they look very cohesive, which is amazing considering it's all these disparate pieces. I mean, it's a team made up essentially entirely of transfers who had not played together before this year. And again, you could look at their schedule and say, well, it's a bunch of cream puffs. And then they went to Mississippi State and won, Mike. And that really changed my perception of them a little bit. What do you see when you watch the Gophers?
Yeah, I think, first of all, some teams that are completely retooling or were projected to finish low, as Minnesota was in other leagues, Missouri comes to mind, are losing some of those games that one would expect that they would win, including Kansas City. I mean, that would be an example of a team that played Mizzou and won, but obviously the Gophers took care of. But I agree with you about that Mississippi State game. Most of those results that they got earlier on were games that you would expect a Big Ten team to win, any Big Ten team. The Pitt game was not a pretty show, but they fought through that. Both teams were really struggling late, but they were the ones that made the plays to close it. And then to go to Mississippi State and win that one. 2 high major road games in a row. I don't think that you can complain about where Minnesota is. And I think that what it says is that when Minnesota, Ben Johnson starts to get the players in there that he's going to get, that there's a ready-made culture that they can all step into, that there are going to be standards. It's not going to be this freshman comes in and has to change everything. Maybe elevate the talent level, but not necessarily change the approach to the game. Ben's done a terrific job in his first few months of establishing what he wants Minnesota to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's tough, defensive-minded. It feels like in watching them, some of the offensive limitations might catch up with them here, but still, again, to your point, he has very clearly forged an identity, and that's always your first task when you take over as a head coach. Done a remarkable job. Talking about teams with identities, how about the Purdue Boilermakers? We don't want to bury the lead here in the Big Ten. They're number 1 in the country for the first time in school history, which is amazing considering all the great teams they've had. And, of course, they've been close through the years. And they're unanimously number 1 in the AP. All 61 voters voted Purdue number 1. We all know, look, the end game is not about being number 1 in December. It's about getting to the Final Four. They were less than a second away from making it a few years ago and, of course, fell short against the eventual national champs in a heartbreaker against Virginia. What do you see in this Purdue team that makes you believe this could be the group that breaks through and does get to the Final Four, maybe even wins it all?
Well, the first thing is the obvious thing. 2 centers who are All-America quality, not good, but legitimately great in their own rights. The fact that you have Zach Edey starting and Travion Williams coming off the bench. Travion Williams, sometimes you can say that someone could start for anybody. But what that means is if you gave that player to another team, they'd happily have him. But Travion Williams could move out of 358 teams, he would come in and move out about 352 of the starting centers in Division I basketball. That's how good he is.
Right.
But as it is now, he's coming off the bench. So to have that, you don't have to worry about your big guy getting into foul trouble. If it happens, you have another one just as good, just different, that can come off the bench and replace him. The depth is terrific. I think there are obstacles to that, to having so many great players, so many talented players, but it does give you a variety of choices on a day when a player isn't performing well. You don't necessarily have to ride him. And then the thing that I think has been the difference maker for them to this point has been their shooting. That was my biggest concern. I had them preseason number 3 coming out of the Final Four last year. Then I spent the summer thinking about the fact that they didn't make shots last year. And I talked myself into dropping them a smidge to number 5. But the way they're shooting the basketball now, that changes everything. If they continue to play that way, then they can they can certainly be a Final Four team and maybe a national champion. That jump shooting ability that they're getting out of Brandon Newman, at the level that Sasha Stefanovic is playing, not just home games at Mackey, but big-time games, big-time opponents on neutral floors. He shot the basketball really well. And, of course, the progression of Jaden Ivey. Jaden is a phenomenal He's not just a phenomenal prospect anymore. He's a phenomenal college basketball player. He may be the best player in the country. And to be able to put him out on the wing in a late clock situation and say, hey, Jaden, we're in trouble. Go do something. I don't know that there's anybody in college basketball who's better in that moment right now than he is.
Mike, who's next in the Big Ten? If Purdue is clearly head and shoulders, to me, Illinois and Michigan struggled early. It seems like they're both rounding into 4. Michigan was outstanding last night. Nebraska had a lot to do with it, unfortunately, did not play well at all. But is it one of those two? Is it someone else?
I still think Illinois is very close to Purdue. I picked them ahead. Of course, Andre Curbelo has not played recently. Wasn't effective in his early games. I still think there's a great player there waiting to get out, and I hope we see that player through the course of the Big Ten season, because I believe he changes everything for Illinois. He elevates them another rung. What they've gotten out of DeMonte Williams and Trent Frazier has been terrific. It's sort of sharing that position, but they know that they're better with Andre. We're seeing Caleb Houston start to figure out Division I basketball. Maybe Michigan jumped off the deep end a little bit too much with their schedule early, and Caleb wasn't quite ready. But you're seeing now that that the player that was rated number 8 in the country by 24/7 Sports, well, actually both countries, I should say, because he's Canadian, but in the class of 2021, yes. He's terrific, and he's now what you're seeing now elevates everybody at Michigan. It makes everybody a little bit more dangerous with the way he's playing.
Yeah, no doubt. It feels like just in the last week or so, Michigan and Illinois have been trending up a little bit here. So should be a great race down the stretch. As always, looking forward to following it with you, Mike. Great stuff, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Absolutely.
The NCAA Volleyball tourney has reached the Sweet 16, and 6 Big Ten teams remain alive. They will all play tomorrow. You see the matchups, including one featuring 2 Big Ten teams, Nebraska and Illinois. In all, the tourney has largely gone according to form. 14 of the 16 seeded teams are still playing. Illinois pulled off probably the biggest upset. They ousted the 7th seed defending national champ, Kentucky. Big Ten Network volleyball analyst Emily Ehman, who played at Northwestern, joins us to bring us up to date now on where things stand. Emily, let's dive into this a little bit. Big picture, it feels like the Big Ten has to feel good, right? I mean, we talked all year about this is the deepest conference in the country, and it has shown itself to be to this point, correct?
Yeah, and up until now, we always kind of talk about how the Big Ten is the best conference, but it really shows during tournament time where these teams make it. You see a team like Illinois upsetting someone like Kentucky, and to Big Ten fans, it's not even that surprising because they're playing such a tough schedule all season long. But like you said, 6 teams in the Sweet 16. It's the second time in the last 4 years this has happened. So big picture-wise, Big Ten is sitting pretty.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that Illinois win, because I think kind of nationally that's probably the match where people said, wow, how about that? Again, Kentucky, a young team, but they were the defending national champ. They were the 7th seed. We know how good Illinois can be, but they were kind of middle of the pack in the Big Ten this year. How surprising was that to you?
Yeah, Illinois is a team where in the beginning of the season, I might not have, if you told me that they would have beat Kentucky, I might not have believed you. But where they're at now, they're peaking at the right time. You want to peak during tournament time, especially early on. They've done so well, especially late in the season. They pulled off a few upsets during the regular season. And then, that game against Kentucky, I think most people across the country would have thought that it went Kentucky's way. But they take that first set, they go down, and then we're tied 1-1. A great response in set 3. They win like 25-10. So Illinois just firing on all cylinders in that match. And I think it's something that they can do. They play up to their opponents, which is really big come tournament time. They have an outside hitter, Raina Terry, who had 27 kills during that match alone. I mean, she is just insane. Definitely someone to keep an eye on. But I think the difference for them this year, they have a lot of good pins historically, but Kennedy Collins, their middle, I think has been the difference, especially as of late. She's really turned it on, and you can see during tournament time that she's really peaking and helping this entire team peak.
Let's talk through some of tomorrow's matches. Start with Purdue and BYU. And Purdue really had to rally to get past Dayton. Now they get a BYU team that I know a lot of people felt like was underseeded going into this tournament. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, I mean, they went undefeated during their regular season play. They're a very strong team. A lot of people did think they were underseeded. And for Purdue, they went down 0-2 to Dayton, came back with the reverse sweep, but they match up pretty well. Now, BYU is a really efficient hitting team, but Purdue really relies on their defense. They rely on their block. They're one of the best blocking teams in the entire country. So it'll be kind of a really good offense versus a really good Purdue defense. And then at the same time, Purdue has a lot of weapons, like any single place on the court, whether it's the front row or the back row, they're always firing. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how Purdue's defense matches up against this BYU offense that is very elite.
Purdue 7 wins against top 25 teams this year, so certainly they're not going to be phased, nor would any Big Ten team, frankly, with how good the league is. Minnesota and Baylor, they played early in the year. Baylor won. What would Minnesota need to do to win this time?
Yeah, well, if you're playing a team like Minnesota, one of the things you got to do is either kind of stop Stephanie Samity, which is nearly impossible, or stop the other outsides. And Baylor's very similar to that. They have 2 really, really good outsides, Yassiana Presley and Avery Skinner. Avery Skinner won the national championship with Kentucky last season. So if you're Minnesota, you got to focus on stopping those outside hitters. And Melanie Schaffmaster, the setter, and Stephanie Samity, the 2-time Big Ten Player of the Year, they're going to have to block really, really well up there. This team also relies on their defense, but they really rely on their backcourt defense. They're out there, libero Cece McGraw. She didn't play the first 2 rounds. They had a different libero step in who did really well. But I think this team, they have to figure out how to shut down those 2 outsides, and they'll be in a good spot. But Stephanie Samity, I mean, she's going to go off. She's going to get her kills like she always does for Minnesota. So they really rely on her, and you're going to see the ball go to her about 40% of the time. So it'll definitely be a good one. But yeah, Baylor's another team where they played in a conference that isn't as strong. And that's where I think Minnesota has a leg up. They're playing teams all year round that are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and again, if you have Stephanie Samity, you have a chance, as we know. You have a really good chance. If Minnesota were to win that now, they would likely face Wisconsin, although the Badgers would have to get past UCLA first. I know UCLA is seen as one of the weaker teams that remains in this field. Give us a sense of what the Badgers are up against here.
Yeah, well, both of these teams are very physical. I mean, UCLA is a very physical team. They have Mac May, who's definitely a National Player of the Year candidate, and they run almost their entire offense through her. So they're really going to get her the ball all the time. But Wisconsin, where they have a leg up, their blocking is so solid. You have someone like Dana Retke up there, a 6'8" middle. She's going to try to shut her down as much as possible, along with the other right side blockers. So it's just 2 physical teams that are really going to go at it. I mean, Wisconsin has big players at every single position. So I like matchup for matchup. I would give Wisconsin the edge. And of course, they're one of the best teams in the nation. But as long as Wisconsin plays Wisconsin volleyball, I do think they'll kind of roll past UCLA, not easily, but if they play their game, they should be able to handle them pretty easily.
And again, Wisconsin, the 4 seed, the pick of many to make it to the Final Four. Ohio State and Georgia Tech is interesting to me, just in that you have 2 programs that kind of feel like they're on the rise and really playing better here. What do you make of this matchup?
Yeah, these are 2 teams that they've both been on the rise, and even matchup-wise, they match up really, really well. They have such powerful, dominant, physical offenses, a lot of big firepower at the front. Right now in the nation in kills per set, Georgia Tech is number 1 and the Buckeyes are number 2. So it's going to be a battle of who can play defense better, who's going to block better, who in the backcourt is going to dig more balls. If you're looking at Georgia Tech, you have 2 players that are absolutely incredible, Julia Bergman and Mariana Brambila. So Ohio State's going to look to stop those outsides and try to lower their efficiency, handle those pins just a little bit better. But Ohio State has got to play a really good defensive game. We know they're going to bring the offense. They always do. But if they can bring the defense in this one, they should be good. But you got to rely on your defense. Defense wins championships, and you have to get through that next opponent to move on. And
they really have been playing well. They've won 11 of their last 12 coming in. And then one of the interesting kind of sidebars to this is, of course, the Final Four is in Columbus. So were Ohio State fortunate enough to win the next 2, they would have home court advantage there in the Final Four. I mentioned we have an all-Big Ten matchup, Nebraska and Illinois. We talked about the Illini earlier and the win over Kentucky. The Huskers have really dominated them when they have played this year. Do you give Illinois much of a chance here, or do you feel like this is Nebraska's match to win?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Nebraska, especially as of late, they're playing lights out volleyball. But it is a team where the entire season they were a little bit up and down, kind of a roller coaster of a team. But when they're hot, they get hot. We saw that last matchup, the last regular season matchup of the year against Purdue, they played lights out volleyball. So if they're going to play like that, I think Nebraska could beat any team in the country. But this matchup specifically is so about the serve and pass battle. It's something that coaches talk about all the time. You got to serve and pass to win. But these are two teams that are two of the best passing teams in the conference in the country, but two of the best serving teams. Illinois' serve is so lethal. And I think if they can get Nebraska out of system, take Kayla Caffey and Lauren Stivrins, their middles, out of the offense, they'll have a chance. But Illinois is going to have to serve really tough and pass really well. And again, Illinois is peaking at the right time, so I think they can do it, but they're going to have to play some of their best volleyball. And Nebraska is going to have to play as consistent as they kind of have been.
Emily, last question for you. It's a profound one. Which Big Ten team has the best chance of walking away winning this thing?
Yeah, I think it's Wisconsin at this point, just all around. We've talked about it all season long. It's going to be their third potential Final Four in the last 3 years. They have so many fifth-year seniors that came back. They want to win that national championship. They came back to win that national championship. I think they have the best road ahead. They could see Baylor or Minnesota, which I would still give Wisconsin the edge on to push them to the Final Four. And then they would see Louisville, who I think they match up well with, an undefeated team if they get there. But Wisconsin, they have all the pieces together. They are so hungry for a win. Coach Kelly Sheffield has talked about it all season long, man. All these players came back because they want to win a national championship. And I think they're going to be so dialed in that it's going to be really hard to beat them, especially down the line and in these first couple matchups.
Emily Ehman, great stuff. Really appreciate all your insights. Thanks so much for taking some time out.
Thank you.